Good morning and welcome to the meeting of the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. My name is Councillor John Taylor. I'm chair of this committee. I'll start by asking the members present if they could just briefly introduce themselves.
Councillor James Homewood from Ashborough Ward.
Councillor Kath Pinnock from Cleckheaton Ward.
Councillor Imran Safdar, Crossland Moor and Netherton Ward.
Councillor Caroline Holt, Liversidge and Gomersall Ward.
Councillor Angela Sill from Gurkha Ward.
Thank you very much, and we're supported by Nicola here as well, and I'll ask officers to introduce themselves as they introduce their agenda items, if that's okay. And thank you. So I'll move on to agenda item 2. Agenda item 1, which is member of the committee. Apologies. We received apologies from Chris Jones. That's the only apologies received, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. These have been circulated with the papers. Are members content with the minutes of the committee? We'll take that as a yes. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Just to remind members, if there are any items on the agenda in which they have an interest, if they can please declare that. They can do that now or when we get to the agenda item. If you do declare an interest, can you just please fill in the form, hand it to Nicola at the end of the meeting, documenting your interest. Mission of the public. I believe everything's been taken in public today. Okay. Deputation petitions.
None received, Chair.
Public questions.
None received, Chair.
Right, swiftly on to item 7. So, Janet and Scott, I'm not sure who's presenting, but I'll hand it over to you guys.
That one.
There.
Thank you. Apologies. Hello, I am Janet Sharp. I am the Interim Service Director for the Homes and Neighbourhoods. I'm pleased to bring to you today the latest update on district heating that's in line with some of the recommendations, obviously, from the audit report. So along here today, obviously, Scott Wise, my head of service, who will take us through the report, and we're happy to pick up any questions or observations as a result of the report here today. Thank you.
Okay, excuse my cold. I don't seem to be able to shake it this year. The paper itself broadly goes through the background details that were issued at the last audit committee in October. What I was really intending to do was just to go through the next steps, what we're doing to get towards a new billing and metering contractor. So we're continuing with our monthly meetings. We're in the process of completing a boiler replacement programme for the year, and we're actually planning next year's programme as well. We're working with HR on the recruitment for a dedicated person to manage this contract going forward. We'll be collaborating closely with our consultant who we've recently appointed, and they're advising us on the procurement approach. This is a very specialist contract, and we need to make sure that we're covering off all the risks that we encountered with the previous contract and the contract management, as well as giving us some detailed advice around regulation changes and advice around our emerging decarbonisation strategy. We're going to agree a programme including the route to tender and specification, following the necessary reviews and assessments, which includes a full boiler plant room assessment, a review of the current forward cost plan that we have, just to ensure we understand all the efficiencies around the boiler rooms and what our priorities would be in terms of investment as part of the capital programme. And we complete monthly reviews with our existing billing and metering providers as an ongoing process. At the same time, we have identified that a number of lessons need to be learned. These are set out again in the report. Again, it's going to be about making sure we've got sufficient resources and team capabilities to be able to pick up the expertise required about managing these quite specialist contracts. We're collaborating closely with the consultant to ensure that we've got a detailed understanding of our heating networks and ensure that we make enough provision for improvements. One item, for example, might be or would be the likelihood of an installation of remote metering capability in the boiler rooms, which we don't currently have. And we'll continue to review the payment costs that we charge to the council via the corporate gas provider and how much we're recovering from the residents who are in receipt of the heating. Also to say that we recalibrated the payments and the meters for all of the people on the networks in January and wrote to the residents accordingly a month before that, and those costs are now being recovered in full based on an assessment carried out by the expert consultant at that time, which is our current provider. That's all I've got, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. I'll open this to members first. Caroline?
Yeah, could I just, having met with some of the tenants who've received their letters, what have they done regarding most of my ward, that's Liverpool Gomersall, have extensive solar panels that were installed on their buildings? Part of the procurement, has those solar panels been factored in for the new boilers? Because that's a use of green energy and also will reduce their costs in the long run.
The answer to that is that the current specification, I believe, does include understanding the inputs from the solar panels, and that we're getting the contractor, when we review the specification, to incorporate anything that was in the existing arrangement, and that will be carried forward into the new arrangements accordingly. My assumption is that those efficiencies will therefore be captured at that time.
Can I just follow up on that then? So we've increased, according to the report, we've increased the charges for all of the impacted properties. But if some of those properties have solar panels on them, should we be charging them the same as the ones that don't have solar panels?
The contract does do an assessment of the analysis of the input of the panels as part of the efficiency. So when the plant room efficiencies are evaluated, I understand the provision of the panels is taken into consideration.
That's not answering the question really, Scott, to be honest. The question is, if we have two tenants and one is in a flat that has a solar panel above it and one isn't, should they both be paying the same charge or not?
So rather than me try and answer what I'm not aware of the detail, I will take the query away and do an assessment of that particular example. Do you have the addresses of the property?
I have asked that question because I went to both the meetings at Oxford Grange, and that one has extensive solar panels, and I was told that it had no effect on the charging because the community areas were through the boiler, and that doesn't have any take on the costings. And I thought, well, they're putting a huge amount of solar energy into the resources, and I asked for a breakdown of how much they were actually getting into the system and how much that was actually reflected in their charges, because they've gone up an awful lot at Oxford Grange and the residents are really quite unhappy at how they've been treated.
Right, if I can take this away, I think it really depends, obviously, how the solar panels have been installed and what has been achieved from them. So I think, given, I don't know the estate personally myself, but it sounds like we need to provide quite a comprehensive response here into how they've been installed, how they're collecting those energy, those savings, and also with the new charges, what exactly has been taken into account before those invoices being raised. So one of the things I think we need, thank you, Councillor, we will need to go back to those residents and provide that real clarity so they can be assured that the investment that they're putting in place in their homes has been reflected in the final bills and the proposals. So if you could leave that with myself and Scott, we will make sure we provide that comprehensive response.
Thanks, Janet. And I do feel a little bit for the pair of you, actually, because you're coming to answer things that you weren't around when these things arose. So, but at the end of the day, we've got to do right by our tenants. I'm not feeling very comfortable that we're all over this at the moment, in terms of really understanding. I mean, my next question was going to be, well, if we're not sure, if we should perhaps be charging different residents different rates, well, what's happening about the recouping the losses? Because, are we recouping different amounts from different residents then? If, they should have been charged different rates because of the contribution. So it's not just looking forward, you need to look back as well. So I just wonder whether I think you will be coming back again, because I don't think we're going to be able to be satisfied today that everything is
yes, right.
in hand.
What I can provide is that a considerable amount of work has taken place with regarding the billing and also those. I would be surprised if consideration hasn't been taken place into the stuff. But what I don't want to do here today is to confirm something. What I would like to do is do a full and comprehensive review, taking back, because it sounds like we need to assure residents of exactly how the final cost as a whole has been broken down and what we've taken into account to arrive at those bills that we're asking people to pay. And also, if we find any resident in extreme hardship, how we are triaging support to those residents. And I think before we do it, I would prefer, obviously, I haven't looked at the detail myself of the individual question that has been raised, but now it has been raised with me. I will ensure that we do a proper investigation. I'm pretty certain that officers who have done a considerable amount of work have been all over this and taken this into account, but rather than saying this here today, I would prefer to review and come back.
Yeah, I think it needs that, because the report suggests there's only one charge. There's only one rate.
Yes.
So either officers have looked and decided, and they've dismissed the contribution from the solar panels in some way, or the report's wrong.
The answer to those, there will be one rate, but what we need is how that has been calculated and what has taken into account to arrive at that.
Most of the schemes have different rates, is the reality. It's made up of a whole range of rates, and there is an analysis of that which can be provided. I think one of the reasons we've appointed a specialist consultant is to make sure that they pick up all of this detail, because it is a real technical and specialist area, and there are some complex calculations to be done. And so that is essentially why we're getting an independent expert in to advise us accordingly.
So if I've understood that right, we've done that analysis and we've told different residents that there are different rates that are going to be applicable to their property.
We've not told them there's different rates, we've told them what their rate will be.
Not everybody's been told it's, quotes here 13.7p. The different ones will be charging different.
That's right, yeah. Based on the efficiency of the plant room, which varies across all of the different schemes.
Okay, I'll come back to other members.
Can I just come back to that? I think one of the biggest thing is they received a letter that told them there was a deficit of £11,000 and just what they were paying. And then, it will be capped at £10. There was no indication there how they came to that figure, which, I grant you haven't got the information, and I totally accept that. But then when we asked the question, most of the boilers run 24 hours a day, and there's no way to actually time that. So you've got boilers going on right through the night, heating communal areas for absolutely no... And we said, well, could they put on a time clock? Oh, well, nobody has access to the boiler room. Or the only thing they have access to is the thermostat. So you've got efficiencies there that could be saved overnight, which they're paying for, which are clocking up, and they can't touch the boiler. It's not even... They've got a new boiler at one place, and when it was commissioned, there's no timer on it. So surely, even on my level of understanding, if that's happening across all of the homes, that's a huge amount of energy being charged now to the residents, which actually is unnecessary, and it's giving them excess costs. So has that been brought with the specialist, or even just going around to survey the areas to say, are you actually got these boilers running at the right times?
Again, this is why we've appointed the specialist to do that analysis. The upshot is that we're advised from specialist input is that district heating remains more efficient than running your own individual boiler. That is the sort of business case for doing a district heating scheme. But, I mean, the question's still valid. What is the efficiency and how is it calculated is something we all need to know.
I'm going to bring James in first and then Kat.
Yeah, just a bit of, it's a different question, and I might just be being confused here, but when, so we've taken action to address the charging problems. So what happens now going forward? So obviously, utility and wholesale prices change all the time, and there's an energy price cap, isn't there, which I presume applies here. So what's happening here is the price. How is that being reviewed? Because obviously, this happened in the case where we were undercharging people, but we could also have been overcharging people if the wholesale costs had gone the other way. So I'm just trying to work out, we put something right, but for now, but when the next price cap review comes out, whatever, how is that being managed and maintained?
So, a good question. So we corrected the price charging regime following analysis with the existing billing and metering contractor, and that was done with their advice about the efficiencies that they knew about of the plant room. That's number one. Number two, the corporate gas provider contract is actually changing, and that will give us a different cost in all likelihood, so we'll probably need to recalibrate at that point as well. Number three, we're going to be procuring the new billing and metering contractor whose analysis of all the reviews of all the plant room and efficiencies and all of the details will likely come up with a different number as well because of the revised and hopefully enhanced analysis. So that too will happen. The other thing that's important to understand is that when we do this switch of contract, that all of the meters in all of the buildings, and there's over 1,000 of them, will need to be changed as well, so that they're all open protocol and they're all monitorable remotely. So there's a whole number of steps. This is not going to be a flick switch job. This is going to be a programme, and it will also probably include some improvements to the plant room as well, as I described earlier.
So, for example, when the energy price cap gets reviewed, and I think, yeah, in April, say it goes up by 10%, are you proposing your prices to go up by 10%? And if in the future it goes down by 30%, what control will be in? Will it go down by 30%? Or I mean, I don't know whether our prices are anywhere near what the price cap charge is, but...
I don't know the answer to that, but what I will do is take advice from our consultants is the answer. They will advise us as business best practice.
It's separate account, and so energy prices will fluctuate. But what we have to do, and what we have a duty to do, is demonstrate to our residents that, you know, when they are done and they're impacted, how they've impacted on their bills. If it is a very small marginal, then what you would normally do from one year to the next is then address that within the bill setting for the following year. If it is dramatic and significant, and that is beneficial to tenants, then one of the things that it would do is maybe do an in-year change to their bills. But it's really, really important that residents, you know, have you know, bills that they know that they are paying, and because, you know, the energy market can be fluctuate quite widely. What we understand in, you know, the word of the cap and things like that, what that means in practice. So what we need to do is keep the bills fairly steady, but where there are fluctuations, make sure that they account. But that money won't be lost. If there is savings, that won't be lost. It will use to inform the resetting of the bills going forward.
That's fine. So just one
Like
last
a ring
thing.
fenced account.
I appreciate it's
Yes, yeah.
confusing. So I suppose I'm thinking about it from the user's perspective, which
Yes.
obviously isn't the only perspective that exists here. But I suppose there's two things. So one is obviously we need to be compliant with the rules around what we can charge people. So I'm just trying to understand, make sure we've got that control in there. The second thing, which I think what you've alluded to, is that one of the problems we've had, and I don't think this was a particular example, but we've seen it in other areas where maybe we've subsidised costs, and then when we've now gone to increase them, people are like, well, hang on, that's double the cost of what it was before, whereas actually what's happened is over time, we probably should have been reviewing the cost of that service. And you know what it's like, you know, obviously I'm sure those people who were paying less for X 2 years or whatever it was, I'm sure that's a benefit in some ways to them, but it's not great, is it, if your costs suddenly increase massively all at once. So I think it's just both those things, how it applies to the individual and how we make sure that we're compliant. And even if we're within, a general cap of price or whatever, we still want to have the best, for the people in our network. We want to give them the best price possible, don't we? We don't want them to be overpaying.
And absolutely, and the council has a responsibility to make sure it understands exactly what the costs are, just in the same way that our residents do, so that we know what is the factual position regarding the costs of running the district heating schemes and how those costs are apportioned. That is obviously something we must do. The next stage is then thinking of this from a resident's point of view, in terms of what are they paying now, what are they likely to pay in future on, providing that breakdown, because we will know the full cost of everything in those schemes and how has that breakdown been apportioned, and then how that translates into their bills. And where the difference, so where there has been an issue in the past, it is right, obviously, to put this on a very firm footing, really auditable, finance colleagues, obviously, making sure that all of that is validated. So our residents can be assured they are the total costs. And then also the apportionment is fair and sensible apportionment, and that translates into individual bills. So we need to give confidence that that there isn't a robustness behind those bills. And alongside that, if energy prices then changes, when it changed, how it affected those bills, how it affected the total cost, and how we as a council are then translating that, whether that is an in-year change in their bills or at the end of a financial year, and it will affect and go towards actually maybe limiting the increase in bills in future years if there is a saving to be achieved. And that's what we need to assure the committee and also our residents on how we've got to that position. And if there are outstanding questions, and it sounds from here today, there are a number of resident outstanding questions, we need to make sure we're providing that level of detail that they can be assured that actually, we have got a really strong, good audit track record of what's happening to these bills and what's happening to the costs of running our district heating schemes, and we have a duty to do that.
I'm going to bring... Oh, sorry, James. Yeah, Kath.
I bet there was a committee 30 years ago thought district heating schemes was a really good idea. They're not here now, are they? And
they are a great scheme. One of the things that they have is where you've got a group scheme for many hundreds and hundreds of people. They are a good and efficient way of providing heating. What we have to make sure is that there are the systems and processes behind them to make sure that the bills that the end user is receiving are accurate, are fair, and there is trust in those bills that's what we're doing. That's what we need to do. But they are a great way of providing heating rather than every flat having individual boilers,
well, that leads me on to a couple of things. I'm not going to repeat what others have said. One is, following on from what Councillor Holt said about if, say, people are away, or in some of these circumstances, people have long stays in hospital. If you were at your own home, you'd be able to turn the heating off, wouldn't you? Just just try to understand that and how the system can be made efficient for individuals would be one question. And then the next one is, will most utilities have access to social tariffs, and whether or not that's a possibility for district heating schemes? And the third one is, presumably there's councils across the country have these systems. So are we learning from them about what they do, how they do it? That sort of sharing of good practice stuff. That would be helpful. But I have to say, I think from where we were to where we are has been a huge step change in getting a grip of what's going on. And so, for all the work that's gone behind this, I think somebody deserves the praise for it, because somebody has taken a grip, so that's good.
Yeah, thank you. There is a lot of work going on, and it continues on a regular basis, as I hope the report indicates. Just a comment on the individual efficiencies. I do believe there are control mechanisms within each of the residences where you can actually turn it down. We wouldn't advise you turn it right down, because then there can be other problems that might emerge. But you can turn it down so it becomes more efficient. In terms of peer organisations, I didn't quite get your second point, but the third point you made, peer organisations, our consultants work across a number of organisations and councils, and they're giving us sort of recommendations and advice based on their experiences with those organisations.
Is that okay? So our independent member isn't here today. He's had to give his apologies. He's been asked me to raise a point for him, so I'll just read out what Chris said. On district heating, he said, I found it difficult to assess the adequacy of the progress as the report does not directly address the internal audit recommendations. I suppose there are two key issues. Have the charges been increased, and will they cover the energy cost? I think we covered that. It seems that they have. And secondly, are there systems in place to make sure that there isn't a shortfall in the future? I think the report is saying not yet. When this was last discussed, the committee sought clarity regarding the legality of the heating district heating and the HRA incurring losses on the energy bills of the 193 sold/leasehold properties. I don't believe we've received an answer to that either. So I think the first question he asked around the charging, I think we've covered that, because I think it's very similar to what Jen did. But the point about the HRA has been effectively subsidising properties that aren't council properties, and whether that is legal, we've not had an answer to. And I don't know whether you're able to answer that one today.
Yes, this is part of, putting the really robust systems in place for managing this. The housing revenue account cannot subsidise leaseholders or actually bills. This is a ring-fenced account, and everybody has a duty to pay those bills in the very, very same way. What appears to have happened is that there hasn't been the collection to offset those costs from certain individuals, and that is something that we have to follow up. But what we do need to do is make sure going forward is that both the collection and obviously the bills, given this is account, is that there is no subsidy going in place in terms of within the housing revenue account. It's absolutely, fine for the housing revenue account to pay those initial bills, but it has to have a recovery plan in place for recovering those incomes appropriately to obviously pay those costs.
So just following on from that, and it's probably not, I'm looking at Rachel actually, but it's probably one more for Rachel and Kevin to pick up. So if those costs legally can't be charged to the HRA, have we removed those costs and charged them to the general fund? And if not, is that something we're doing?
So, wait. Sorry. So one of the things that we need to do is that, so any costs that should not be funded from the housing revenue account, those costs, obviously, they have to be supported through a general fund budget. It's okay for those costs to be sat in the HRA as long as there is the income that is offsetting those costs as an administrative process. But one of the things that we do need to look back in terms of how costs, what are the costs, how those costs have been paid, and where is the recovery plan to offset those costs. But it isn't appropriate for the housing revenue account to offset leaseholder costs.
So just put very simply, roughly about 10% of the properties, I think it is, are not council properties. And I think we were incurring something like £2 million losses or something. So there's 200 grand there that shouldn't be in the housing revenue account. Has that been moved out to the housing revenue account to general fund or not?
I'll confirm in writing exactly where we are with the accounts, but that should have been moved out.
Because my problem, and it's not Chris from you, Janet, because you weren't here, so, but this internal audit report was a follow-up to an internal audit report before. The internal audit report was done over a year ago. It wasn't until it came to this committee in the summer that any action started happening. And in reality, we're over a year since internal audit effectively blew the whistle on this. And yet we're still sat here, and I don't feel I've got the assurance I'm looking for that this is being managed well and that actions have taken place as quickly as they should have done. When I look down some of the mitigations, it's talking about recruiting people, it's talking about things we're going to do in the future. Well, we've had over 12 months. So 12 months have gone, and we're still not in a position where we're in control of this. And as I say, I know I'm kind of shooting the messenger here in a way, but it's not your problem because you weren't here. But I will be asking you guys to come back with a robust plan that shows me, so I can see every single internal audit recommendation, and alongside that, what progress has been made, what is still outstanding, what the timescale is for that to be addressed. Because until I've got that, I haven't got the assurance. I'm not comfortable that I understand how much of the losses we are anticipating that we will be recovering, or how much of these losses are effectively, no, just let me finish, how much of these losses effectively our council tenants are effectively going to pay, because they're on the HRA. So it means that there is less money in the HRA than there should be. Kath, can we have one conversation? I don't interrupt you when I'm speaking.
No, I'm just checking on
No,
that.
just we have one meeting.
Calm down.
One meeting.
Calm down.
So I'm wanting to get that confidence that we know how much is going to end up being written off, how much is going to be collected, what actions we're taking to collect monies from the non-council tenants, because then that money shouldn't be on the HRA. I don't see any evidence in the report that we've addressed that, or we know how we're dealing with that.
If I could suggest, I think us returning to the committee to provide clarification on a number of questions that's raised here today is absolutely the right course of action, and I fully support that. And through the work that I'm doing to review with officers in terms of where we are, in terms of both losses from any tenants' bills as well as leasehold bills, is I'm wanting the assurance of how the account is managed, and also to provide you with the assurance that you need going forward. So we will take that away, and happy to come back. And as you suggest, we go back, look back in terms of that original report, all of the actions that have taken, and also that has previously been reported to this committee. And then also in terms of the actions that we're putting in place for making sure that we've got more robust arrangements moving forward for district heating.
Yes, forgive me if I'm asking a rather simple question. In page 15, we mentioned decarbonisation. Quite a number of of lines. Forgive me sounding such. So we're looking at installing new boilers, but at the same time we're talking about decarbonisation on a regular basis, and we're looking at recruiting dedicated resources to manage this strategy. So forgive me for sounding, for sounding rather confused. What is that strategy? Because obviously long term, because we're a green council, climate change is a really significant problem. And obviously we're really concerned about emissions and using expensive, sometimes foreign imported gas. So what is our strategy? I mean, obviously I share the concerns of all the elected members here, and I especially share the concerns of Councillor Holt. So are we looking at a long-term solar strategy? Are we looking at, because obviously there's issues regarding energy security, and a lot of this may be above our pay grade, but what's the long-term strategy or the medium-term strategy, and do we have the funds? And to implement that strategy, are we going to have to charge the tenants a lot more money? And also I'm also concerned about, and I know Councillor Pinnock mentioned that yes, there's extra charges, but if you look at the national rates, that's going to be 6.99 per kilowatt hour per unit of gas. Obviously we're charging, what are we charging right now? We're charging 14.5 to 13.7, so presumably there's extra admin and maintenance costs in that. So, but coming back to the decarbonisation, I'd be really interested to hear how we're going to move forward with that.
So we've got a commitment from the asset management strategy that we will deliver a sustainability stroke decarbonisation, whatever energy strategy in line with the corporate objectives. So that's what we've got to do. We don't have one yet. We know that plant like this, as it gets older, it gets more inefficient and there are problems with it, and we may need to look to other solutions for driving the energy from these boiler rooms. These solutions might be fundable via funding, whether it's the combined authority, mayor's pledge or whatever. There are resources available for us to bid for, and we are doing individual initiatives as part of our investment planning around these objectives, but we don't have a fully formed plan, and it's right that you've identified that. It's also correct that we're getting advice from our independent consultant to help us frame such a strategy and a plan, and to start off with probably some pilot initiatives that would start looking at the different technologies. And that's pretty well the way that most organisations go about this. It can't be a big bang. It's far too expensive to do it all in one go tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. So you have to think about how do we start to feather this out? What information do we need? What knowledge and learning do we need to do as an organisation? So it's very early days as part of that strategy. We've got to get some of the basics right, and I think that's one of the reasons we're here, and that's what we're concentrating on. It's just that we'll take the advantage of having the specialist in the room to help advise us on a programme and a strategy going forward.
Okay.
I'm going to disagree with the chair. I mean, I do think you've made an enormous progress. You know, the chart on page whatever, indicates. We all go. Indicate the progress that has been made, and I personally think that the whatever we call it now, homes and neighbourhoods have got a real good grip on this. There will be, inevitably, individual type details, the solar panels, the access to social tariffs, that sort of detail that will affect individual tenants directly. And so I personally think a lot of work has been done, because this is, as we discovered in the summer. I mean, I do accept nothing seemed to happen from internal audit till the summer, but since then, a huge amount of work has been done, which is to the credit of the team. Yeah, I just think we need to just keep an eye on it. And one of the things that we don't do as a council, never do, well, we used to, but never do in recent years, is is really look at the HRA account. That is always lost in the debates about the general account. And maybe that's another job for this committee to one session have a real look at HRA account and understand it. Anyway.
Just on that final point, we'll pick that up and talk to officers about when we could possibly bring something forward on that. Thank you. I'm going to swiftly move on to agenda item 8 on the proposed revisions to financial procedures. I'm not sure who's actually presenting this one. Oh.
So my name's Samantha Lawton. I'm the Service Director for Legal Governance and Monitoring. Martin Durnley, Head of Audit and Risk, is joining us online. Nicola, I believe. Is that right? Is he on? Okay. Okay.
Hello everyone. Sorry I'm not in the room personally this morning. So if I can just run through the proposed changes to financial procedure rules for the municipal year 20, or from the municipal year 25-26, which the committee is being asked to give consideration to, and then if you're happy, recommend to council. You've got what we've done for you is we've done you an appendix which lists the proposed changes, and then you've got a track change version to share for your consideration. So what we've done is we've been through and tidied up quite a lot of the titles and definitions and tried to make them clearer. So we now describe the Chief Finance Officer or Service Director Finance as the CFO throughout the document. We've changed the word Strategic Director to the current title of Executive Director, and we've consistently used the word Capital Plan. All those have been accepted in the track change you've got because they're just sort of tidying up issues. So the areas that we have made changes to, and I think it's true to say that none of these change any fundamental issue about the extent of authority of officers, or reduce or increase the authority of cabinet or anything like that. They leave all those neutral. All they do is look to make things clearer and to be sure that just occasionally we don't get caught in traps which arise when we, for example, get money sent to us from WICA at the last minute with can you spend it on this by that date. So that I'll come to that when we get to it. So there are sort of a couple of pages worth of changes that are all described through. So some of them are procedural really. 1.7 is a reference to the fact that can everyone still hear me, by the way? Hello. Hey, can you still hear me?
We can still hear you.
Oh, sorry, yes, I wasn't sure whether it's just that something went wrong on my screen, but it's fine now. Again, thank you, Chair. So section 1.7 deletes reference to the monitoring officer because, as has been pointed out, the responsibility to ensure that the council has a balanced budget is clearly and only with the Chief Finance Officer, and so we've just tidied that a bit up. We've also been clear. We've also changed the period, or we're also recommending a change in the period of which the MTFP is prepared to facilitate a longer time horizon. I think from time to time the Chief Finance Officer will advise you whether he believes that we need to do a long-term or a short-term plan, probably linked to whether the government is offering a short or long-term money, or a short or long-term grant agreement. We've got clearer words in the delegation agreement at section 2.2 to make clear the applicability of authority, and we've also added in some words about the clarity and separation of the HRA, which we just had a conversation about. There are some slight amendments to wordings in sections 2.5 and to 2.8 about what the objectives of budget savings are. And then we've added in a few more words about the cabinet and what the cabinet could do. But again, it's all about setting out the clarity of that authority. It's not changing that authority. It's also at 2.21 making clear that the CFO can manage the general reserve and earmarked reserves, and that he has the right to transfer the money from the reserves to service budgets in accordance with a particular set of agreements that are set out. And then it's also relaxing a sort of rule that previously said that you can't that in certain circumstances you can't, or it's just basically said you can't transfer money between capital and revenue, to one which actually now requires you to actually do it in a particular way, seeking the Chief Finance Officer's permission. Moving on a little bit into the areas of capital, again, all these are about improving the clarity of what's being proposed. Section 5.4 in relation to internal audit, basically make sure that we recognise the global internal audit standards, which I'll be coming to the next meeting to talk about a little bit in the context of the audit of internal audit activity. Excuse me, 5.7 again adds in some responsibilities. To be clear, that my responsibilities include fraud and whistleblowing management. 9.10 introduces the term financial instrument to be clear that the role of the Chief Finance Officer with regard to treasury and borrowing only relates to financial transactions and isn't actually a responsibility about property leases. 11.1 is new wording about the way that the council sets its charges, and 11.7 has a new shorter wording that is more compliant with the government's advice about anti-money laundering. It is true to say that there is nothing that the current wording is not wrong, because it does comply with Law Society advice, but the government's advice is something which is much closer to what we've now got in the FPRs. But there is remains some discretion to accept cash payments in certain circumstances, basically all down now to the Service Director for Legal Governance and Monitoring. Again, some more wording, paragraph renumbering in sections 11.8 to 11. A bit more about who should complete timesheets, that's in 14.4. Some more information about grants, which is in 22.7, 22.5 and 22.14, to be clear, of circumstances where we can accept external grants and what the sort of risks associated with that are, and that those need a risk assessment. So hopefully that was a quick whistle-stop tour of the proposals, Chair, but happy to take any questions that anyone may have.
Thanks, Martin. I'll open it to members first.
I've got questions.
Fire away.
Of course I have. I mean, largely this is just tidying up, isn't it? One of the questions I did have is about the capital plan being potentially could extend it to 10 years. And your explanation, Martin, was that this could be in relation to grant funding. But then I say to myself, grant funding will come from a public body. Public bodies could change over that period. You know, governments get re-elected at least by every 5-year term, and councils by every 4 years. So you just go, you know, the whole thing could change in that period, as we're seeing with, like, the Towns Fund, you know, the changes that are coming with a new government. So I'm not convinced that you need a cap plan to go out for 10 years, because it could change. And the opportunities and risk of change in that period are greater than the need to go to 10 years, would be my view. But I mean, you know, I'm going to be convinced by somebody, namely you.
Well, you may or may not be convinced, and James may or may not want to join in. As I did mention earlier, it's sort of for the CFO to advise what he thinks is it doesn't actually oblige us to do a 10-year capital plan. It simply says that we might do a 10-year capital plan. So I think it's for the Chief Finance Officer to advise the council about what is an appropriate length for an investment plan. I think it's fair to say that sometimes, and it's really about how you match these together, we do supposedly do a 30-year housing investment strategy appraisal, and sometimes some projects do have very long tails in them, but I don't think it's sort of true to say, and I agree with you completely, that we do not know now what work will be needed in 9 years' time on a particular town hall or whatever. So we're not saying that has to be done, but sometimes we might have something where we want to agree and want to sort of nominally indicate the funding is available over a 10-year time horizon for a sort of long-term strategy. Ultimately, I suspect the cultural heart will have had a 10-year gestation period by the time it comes to an end, possibly longer than that. Some of the housing investment strategy areas may well also have a 10-year investment strategy tail to them, particularly as we try to move forward into areas beyond fire safety and damp and mold. So those different things will have different time frames, which where sometimes a 10-year one may be appropriate, in others you're right, 2 or 3 years. But it's true to say that any plan beyond the next year is always subject to a reappraisal by the current year's council. So earlier this week you made decisions about our budget for 25-26. In about a year's time you'll make decisions about 26-27, and all these documents are up for reappraisal at that time. It's just that this is part of a sort of strategic planning, and strategic planning is only ever strategic planning because you have to recognise the circumstances they arise at the time.
So strategic planning is, for me, is a bit different from actual capital plan allocation of funding. So, yeah, okay. I think we're sort of in the same place. The only other thing I wanted to question, really, was I can't remember where it is I should have made a note of where it is in the report, but we've got a change which means that the CFO has to approve all capital projects, I think is what it says, at the contract stage. And it did seem to me that was doing two things. One, drawing back from where the council had gone in previous years to, service director responsibility for those sort of stuff. And secondly, was going to put quite a lot of additional work on to the CFO, which I really couldn't see what was the benefit of it. But sorry, I can't give you the...
No, you're right. It's 3.16. I think it's simply a rewording of on page 42 in the pack, or 18 if you're looking at so if you're in the pack, it's on page 42, 316. It's a rewording of the existing rules. In practice, the CFO has always approved these transactions at their final stage. The approval of the CFO is simply to be satisfied that there is actually the budget there, and that a service director isn't attempting to sort of place a contract that's worth £5 million when the budget only has £3 million in it, and sort of thinking, I'll find the other £2 million at some point. So it's really a sort of mechanistic check by the CFO that the plans and strategies that the council has approved in number terms tie in with what actually is being planned in practice. And I noticed, Chair, that James has come on, so I don't know that he wants to make a comment at this particular point.
No, it's just I agree with that, Martin. It's that sort of thing when we set the capital plan, councils like that, but then when it comes to the cabinet reports, that will ultimately get signed off by the monitoring officer and by the section 151. So it's kind of part of that really, and it's just embellishing the previous point and just slightly changing the narrative. So yeah, fully agree with what Martin said. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks. There was a point raiser by Chris Jones that sent to me as well about a discrepancy between 17, which is gifts and hospitality, and the officer protocol as well. I'm not sure which is right, because one talks about £15, one talks about £25.
I was going to make a suggestion to amend the Officer Code of Conduct to match the financial procedure rules.
Okay, we'll pick it up when we get to that point.
Okay.
Thank you. Any more from members? James and then Caroline.
Yeah, just a really quick one. It's not on the specifics. It was just reflecting on this and then a discussion we've had at a couple of previous meetings ago when we were talking about MRP. The reason I'm raising it is because my interpretation of the discussion we had was that we had this MRP report. It was a little bit confusing because I think at one point the paper said we should approve it and we shouldn't have been approving it and so on. And I think the discussion was that it was a decision that had been, the officers were able to review the MRP position because that was the policy that was set out. But actually it seemed like it had quite a fundamental effect on potentially the risk to the council. So I suppose the question I'm asking is, where would that sort of decision fit in here? Who is that being accountable? Who is that being accounted to? Is it the CFO? Is it does the executive member have to have sight of that? That's just one example. I just wanted to kind of understand how it worked.
I think debate we're having was it council, was it cabinet, or was it this committee that was accountable, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And we've asked for a paper to come back later.
Oh, is that coming back? Okay. If it's coming back, that's fine. When I was reading it through, I was just thinking because it's quite difficult when, to get your head around all this, but I was just thinking of an example in my head. How would that have applied in this procedure to kind of understand how good or not it is,
It is coming back to our next meeting.
Okay, that's fine. We'll discuss it next meeting then.
Being new to all this, having read things through, I was interested to see and want to question how it's actually followed through. The consultation with ward councillors. I'm not going to raise issues that have happened this year, but I'm certainly in the place where ward councillors haven't been consulted with changes to cabinet decisions or cabinet funding and projects that have been shelved or changed. So is there something going to be put in there that we are actually informed and kept to a bridge of what's happening in our own areas and not find out through the press or other regions that things are changing?
Not sure who wants to take that one on, but when reports come forward, reports at the front of the report are supposed to say where ward council have been consulted, aren't they? It's supposed to list which ward council, the councillors of which ward, not the named councillors, but the councillors of Ashfrow ward or the councillors of Clegg ward have been consulted. But I don't know whether anybody wants to comment on that.
I can certainly take that away, Councillor Holt, and just do a reminder to all service directors across the directorates to ensure they are consulting before. It is something we do check and is included in the report, but it's something we can remind them of to ensure that they are engaging with local ward councillors when they are putting forward their draft cabinet reports. Yeah, thank you.
Any more from members?
Chair, on Councillor Homewood's point, I think it's fair to say that in private companies, the audit committee would normally review accounting policies. So that's one thing again that you possibly will want to consider in relation to the paper that you've asked for. But it's not an absolute obligation, and equally you might want the council to do, or the council might want that role rather than the audit committee. So it's a sort of, it's not an absolute position, but I'm just giving you an observation about how it would be in some private firms. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I'm just going to check with members. We've got no more questions. Oh, come on.
Thanks, Chair. Just picking up Martin's point there, I think because you are designated as those charged with governance at Kirklees Council and therefore sort of oversight of the accounts approval process, I think that accounting policy thing, in my view, would sit appropriately with this committee.
I can see that James wants to come in as well, so if you want to come in, James.
Yeah, it's just to say we actually do a paper in around about April time every year that picks up some of the technical accounting stuff, of which accounting policy I think are part, and estimation techniques and uncertainties. So it's kind of wrapped up in a technical accounting sense in that stuff. And that's a massive long checklist that external audit ask us to comment on and say that's an annual thing in April. The other stuff is we've probably covered it in the Treasury training. We highlight where the approval for various things sit. So we do a capital strategy and a Treasury strategy and investment strategy, and how those are approved and what they contain is kind of set by other prudential code and the other statutory rules. And we sort of covered some of that stuff in the training, so it might be worth where there's some kind of if people aren't overly clear, it might be worth sort of looking through the slides, etc., and attending the next session. We can cover some of those things in detail if that's what what members would like. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Are we happy? So we need to approve these changes and recommend that the report goes to council. Get my terminology right. Are members content with that? Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. We're going to move on to agenda item 9, which is contract procedure rules. I don't know who's taking this one on.
So I'm going to take this one. Unfortunately, Ruth Callandine, who is our head of procurement, can't be with us today. So I have brought a colleague, Councillor Caroline Myers, who's a lawyer from Legal Services, who's also been involved in updating the procedure rules, in case there's any questions. So, as you may be aware, the Procurement Act of 2023 is coming into force on the 24th of February 2025. So what we've done is updated the contract procedure rules to take account of that new legislation. There are a number of changes it does bring. I'm not going to go through all the changes. They're set out in the report in track changes, and we've done a table as well that sets out what we've updated and why. What I was going to make you aware of was some of the sort of key changes that it does introduce. So in terms of the Act, it adds a new competitive flexible procedure, and the good thing about this addition is that it adds greater flexibility because the council can add additional factors in, such as environmental factors, innovation. It's not just about quality and value for money. We can actually put non-financial factors in as well when we are procuring goods. So it adds a new, and I suppose to some extent there's a greater focus on social value as well in that. In terms of transparency, there are expanded requirements, so we have to publish more notices now throughout the procurement of the life cycle of the procurement. So I think there's an additional 5 or 6 notices that we have to produce. There's also the introduction of a central digital portal, which all suppliers have to sign up to. And the teams are working with our suppliers at the moment. Messages have gone out to ensure they are registered on the system so that they can see the full lifetime cycle of a procurement. They can see the notices that we place, where there's additional requirements for us to add in the contracts as well. There is one of the key things I think is important is contracts over 5 million. We now have to include 3 key performance indicators and ensure that we assess the performance of the contract against those KPIs. Again, that's now a requirement in. And we have to produce everyone who is involved in the contract, in the procurement process, has to sign a conflict of interest form to ensure there's no conflict of interest. So there's sort of greater requirements, I think, around integrity of the procurement process, and greater flexibility and transparency. So for the moment, what we've done is updated it's a fairly light touch update to ensure it's in line. So we've changed the aims and objectives of our previous one. We've added in what the new Act are and so forth. What it needs is similar to the FPRs. Once this has been in place throughout the year, we will fine-tune it and do more of a deep dive as we start to, because the old procurement rules still do apply for contracts that were in place for the life of that contract. So we're going to be working across 2 different legislations. Anything we procure new now will come under the new Procurement Act, but anything that's, and we've got a number of contracts we've got some contracts that are 7-10 years that will still be running for some time. So the plan is to do a light touch review to bring us in line, and then a more detailed review, and there'll probably be more changes as the year progresses. And we'll bring a more in-depth review and update to the contract procedure rules next year. That's the plan. But I'm here for any questions that you may have, councillors.
Thanks, Sam. I'll open it up to members.
I mean, it's apposite today, given the legal proceedings that have been taken against former Mayor of Liverpool about contract rules violations. This is dense stuff, but it's really important. And getting the rules right is good. It's that then the next question is, how can we assure that they are applied appropriately, and there's people in place checking, because that's the difficult bit really. This is an important base, but then how do we make sure that folk don't find a way round? On either side of the contract, by the way.
Absolutely, Councillor Pinnock, and I absolutely agree with your point. And one of the key pieces of work we're undertaking this year is contract management. And you will remember that it was an aspect that came out of the Value for Money report. And we've got a small project team. We've been scoping out that work, what that means and what the actions are that we need to take across the organisation. So that piece of work is ongoing, and we've managed to get some transformation support as well. And we'll be taking that through the contract assurance board that we have in place to set out and to be clear with services about how they manage those contracts, what are the principles, what's the training that's needed, and a bit of an action plan about to ensure that we address that. So that, you're absolutely right, and that work is ongoing for us to do that. And we've taken that as an action from the Value for Money report. I think the other thing around this as well, just going back to the point you make, there's now the introduction of a central debarment list in terms of suppliers, and there's been new offences on there that we have to check in terms of our due diligence as well. So there's new offences of corporate manslaughter, of competition law infringement. So there's greater checks around suppliers and checking the suppliers that we're using as well. So that's an additional factor, a check and balance that we'll have in place. But you're right, at the moment we are looking at strengthening our procedures to ensure they are robust, to make sure that people follow them. And we're all involved in that, the Head of Audit and Risk, myself, Chief Financial Officer, through the board and through the transformation support that we've got.
Thanks very much for that, Sam. I don't know whether it'd be worth it, but is it worth this committee having an example of how a contract goes and all the checks that go through, just so we can see what assurances, at each stage are made as part of our role of governance, and that's, I don't know if that's possible.
I think that is possible, and I think that brings it to life, doesn't it? And so you can relate it, because these rules are rather dense, and we can see how we apply them. Maybe I can bring that when I bring back the contract management things, and so you can see the life cycle of a procurement and what the process is around that.
If for me, it's always easier if there's an example,
yes,
rather than the theory of it.
Yes,
somebody could bring an example and show us how.
That's fine.
I just think that's part of our role as for governance stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, nothing too elaborate.
Okay. Okay, that's fine.
Thanks, Kath, and we'll capture that on the action tracker to pick that up. The only comment I was going to make is I'm glad they've introduced that little bit of flexibility, because I always felt when you sat our social value policies alongside procurement, it never really fitted comfortably, did it? So I think it's invaluable because it can help us deliver more in terms of the social value properly, can't we?
Yeah, I agree. Gives us much more flexibility. Yeah.
Any more comments from members? Right. Are we content?
So I just to start off something. She mentioned social value and flexibility, which we welcome. So in regards to ethical considerations, is that something that we're thinking about? Is that give you more scope to listen to the public and elected members?
Yeah, yeah.
There is, under the new Act as well, the evaluation criteria has changed. That contracts can be awarded as the most advantageous tender rather than the most economically advantageous tender. And obviously, the economics is still very important, but it does allow for that flexibility, as you say, to take other things into account. We are slightly constrained by Local Government Act of 1988, which requires that non-commercial considerations can't be taken into account of a procurement process, but the Act does pave the way for those rules to be relaxed slightly, if you like. So we're waiting for that to come into effect, but it will allow us to maybe reserve procurements to a geographical area as well. So we could say that we wanted to just have a procurement that's specifically for Kirklees businesses, for example. But we're just waiting for that to come in. That's the next iteration of the rules. Hopefully next year we'll be able to bring that into effect.
Oh, good.
So could we try to essentially, like obviously in my ward we've got a campaign of shopping local, so could we have considerations where we're trying to buy British, for example, people, organic, ethical producers? Is that something we can now maybe prioritise possibly?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're waiting to come into effect. It's not been enacted yet because of this requirement of the Local Government Act of 1988 not allowing us to have non-commercial considerations other than social value. That's one of the exceptions to that. There are a few other exceptions. However, as I say, under the Procurement Act, it has paved the way for those rules to be relaxed. They haven't been relaxed just yet, but once the government enacts that, then we'll be able to reflect that into the CPRs.
I think we passed a motion last year asking that we try and source food locally as part of that support for farmers, and that would probably fall into that once we're able to do that as well.
It would, yeah.
Right. If everyone's content, are we happy with the proposed changes and happy to recommend them to council for council to approve? Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Constitution update. I assume we're back to you, Sam, are we?
Yes, you're back to myself. Just 1 second while I just get my report. Okay, so this is the annual Constitution review. So the documents that are attached at the appendices are a number of different areas of the Constitution that we've reviewed and made some proposed amendments to. So the first of those are the licensing and safety terms of reference. There are minor amendments that you can see on the track changes. We've also made some amendments to the corporate governance and audit terms of reference. The amendments appear in red and again have track changes. We've got a number of proposed changes to the council procedure rules. And there's an explanation box at Appendix C that sets out some of the reasoning around those changes. I have also reviewed and updated the monitoring officer protocol. Probably one of the key changes for that is that I've added in the standards process, which hasn't previously been available. It hasn't previously been published anywhere. So that's now included with some track changes. There is the Officer Code of Conduct that's been rewritten to modernise the codes, make it easier to read and understand and to bring it up to date. And I have gone back through and ensured it aligns with it doesn't in this because it had already been published, but my suggestion today is committees on board that I'll ensure that the FPR's gifts and hospitality is reflected at £25 in the Officer Code of Conduct as well. And then there's some changes to the licensing and safety committing protocols. Those changes really just change it to, I think, third person, but also there's some strengthening of the wording around the arrangements for training to ensure that members are aware that if they don't do the training, then they're not able to take part in the decision making. So we've just clarified that. What I wanted to say was that this year I set up a Constitution working group, and there was representatives from each of the groups. I have also had some conversations with independent members as well. But all of these proposed changes have been through the group. And on the whole, because you haven't seen them all, there's ones that have come off the table, so we have changed and amended them. So, but in the main, the group was supportive of them. When we get to the council procedurals, there are a couple of those that are probably what I would suggest are the more controversial items. So I'll definitely be seeking, if I highlight them now, I didn't get, it's a bit of a mixed response from the group in relation to these two items. So I wanted to speak to you about specifically in the council procedurals. There's a number of changes, but the ones I wanted to highlight are the two where there was a lack of sort of consensus. One is about the publication of written questions at 11.6 and whether we continue to do that or not. Or do we prefer to go back to the previous way we used to do them, where we don't publicise the questions and we just ask them? Well, we always used to publish the questions, but we wouldn't publish the answers to the questions in advance of the council meeting. So it's about whether we want to keep that or go back to the previous way. The other slightly controversial matter was our wording of motions. In our wording of motions, all motions must ensure that they are a function and a power of council and affect the area of Kirklees. Now, there was a request from one of the members to open that up slightly and widen it and to add the or in, so it's either one or the other. So you could have a motion that's just about the function and powers of council and it doesn't really affect the area of Kirklees, or you might just have a motion, again, that's just about affecting the area of Kirklees. And at the moment, we say you've got to do both. It must be a function or power and it must affect the area of Kirklees. I've kept it in there for the committee to consider because, and I did a little sort of a bit of benchmarking and looking at other local authorities about how theirs are described. And what I found was that most had the or, they were either or, they were wider than ours. So I've left it in as a proposed amendment. I'm not convinced on the whole it would make significant amount of changes to what we accept as a motion because, you know, I try very hard not to get involved in the in the redrafting of motions. They are political motions and they really should be for the political will of council. I just try to ensure accuracy and the legality of anything that we say in them. But those are the two areas I wanted to highlight specifically. I'm not sure how you want to do that. I'm happy to answer any questions on any of those documents, whether you want to go through them in order or just let me know which ones you've got questions on.
Right, well, I'm going to open it to members. I have some comments to make, but I'll wait till the end. I also have some comments from Chris, which I'll wait until the end. But I think Caroline was first to indicate.
It's probably just a wording. It's the appearance of the mayor, elected mayor. I don't really like the word practicable because that implies that she could choose not to come or it's not convenient. So is that wording could be a bit more... Oh, sorry, it's on page 303. It's one of the red changes. So, you know, she is accountable to come to us, but I would hope that that could be insisted that she comes every year, not just a practicable, which could imply that she doesn't come.
Yeah, we left it in there. I mean, she does come every year. I think that the wording was simply because she doesn't always come. She tries to come to the December meeting, doesn't always work. Next year she's coming to the January meeting because it doesn't work with the diary. I think that just gives us flexibility to move her around meetings, really. But obviously we cannot force her to attend. So I've left it where practicable. She does attend. I can't require her to attend.
I just wonder whether there is a different way of wording that then. That it might be that she comes every year or something along the lines of or in consultation with the mayor and chief executive. You know, we use that sometimes where we're giving the authority to vary something to the mayor and the chief executive to use their discretion or something like that.
Yeah, I can look at some alternative wording.
Yeah, so it doesn't suggest that she could just go, well, I can't be bothered coming this year. You know, there's a bit of an onus on reaching an agreement, perhaps, or something. If members are content with that, perhaps to just tighten that up a little bit. I'm looking at members, nobody's looking at me. But, yeah.
That's fine.
Maybe that might help. Is that all you wanted to open it up to other members? Anybody wishing to comment? James?
I was just going to say 2 comments on the constitutional stuff. Obviously, I was part of the constitution working group, so I've seen some of the suggestions and been part of the discussions. I think on the motions, I'm fine with the and/or element because, to be honest, I thought that's what was happening today. But I think this is so I think for me it's just about, and I'm not saying this isn't the correct case, Sam, it's about consistency of application, which is obviously down to yourself and the chief executive, because I'm presuming there were some things that were coming to council's motions that weren't functions of the council, unless you say that doing something like asking the leader to write to government is a function of council, which I guess it kind of is. So I don't know if that was the, you know, because if we're having a debate about a national policy, well, it's not actually in the country, or international, yeah. But I get the point that if it's taken on the view of, well, actually, we do have a role to be able to lobby government or write to government. So I think that's probably what people, you know, that's likely what we're going to be asking to do at the council anyway. So that was my point on that. So I think it's just about the application of it and people assuming it, seeing it's done fairly and equitably for all the groups and things. And then just on the questions, written questions, I mean, personally, I'm not that bothered either way, but I think where I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding. The discussion needs to be had here is that what do members of the council want most? Do they want a written response to a question that they can have to use to provide to their residents or to explain a decision or whatever, or do they want a verbal update which might be less, I don't know, prescribed, written, a bit more organic, I guess, in delivery? And I think that's where some confusion comes, because I think some members when we discussed it want both. Well, that's not going to happen, because if someone's giving a verbal response, that response might be different for something that someone wrote down before they started speaking, because, you know, they might then say something different. So I think it was, I almost feel like, you know, yeah.
So my view on this is I welcome the way we're doing it now. And the reason I welcome the way we're doing it now is we still get the detailed response, but it shortens the time. My concern, if you go back to the old system, is if you've got cabinet members that can speak for 5 minutes and answering a question, you may only get through 4 or 5 questions within the allocated time within the council meeting. And this is one of the few opportunities as councils we get an opportunity to question the executive. And I think it's really important that we maximise the time there is for questioning the executive and getting through as many questions as we can, because there is the opportunity the other way around. If they give the written response, if they read out the response, they can filibuster. And you know, and some of the responses I've had recently, and I've no criticism of the response, they were great, they were really detailed, but if that had been read out, that would have been 5 minutes gone. So my personal view is stick with what we've got. I'll bring other members in.
Right, motions first. I'm going to agree with what Councillor Homewood has said. I think we need to recognise that people elected to the council have a political view, and council motions can be a safety valve for raising very serious issues that don't have anything to do with the council. I'm thinking of Gaza, which is very, very important that there is an opportunity for people who are elected locally to raise the concerns of the residents they represent. And if we don't, it'll bubble up somewhere else, outside in the community. So where it is less able to be in a sort of more controlled and regulated environment. So for me, that is really important, that people are still enabled to raise those issues. On to questions. Well, I mean, I personally think no cabinet member should be speaking for 5 minutes. That's 600 words, and I speak slowly. That is just too long. Far too long. 2 minutes is enough to answer, especially when there's, supplementaries and stuff. And if it needs a long answer, if it's a very complicated issue, then surely what we could do is for the cabinet member to give a brief thing and then say, I will provide a very detailed written answer to the question. Why not? And personally, I like the questions to be asked. And if they're being asked just to get a factual response, why are they asking them in the council chamber would be my thing. Because it's an opportunity to call the cabinet to account for decisions they're making rather than for factual answers, which you can send off to council inquiries and pray that within a year that you get an answer. That's where I am with it. I would give them 2 minutes to answer. Seriously.
Okay, well, so currently there isn't anything in the Constitution that says how long they should answer for, really. We use the 5-minute timer when we're at council. That's why we specifically put it in, because it came from the Constitution Working Group who suggested that there should be a time limit for cabinet members. So the suggestion was 5 minutes. Happy to look at it being, I suppose it's what members want. Do they want a nice detailed response from the cabinet member? They don't. It's only up to 5 minutes. They don't have to speak for that length of time. I think my other point that I would make is there's sometimes some very lengthy questions, and if we're going to limit members in how they respond, then I think correspondingly we need to think about how we limit in terms of the question that's being asked as well. Because we're fairly generous and liberal in our interpretation of when we allow the questions through, and if you see them being published, you will see that they're quite lengthy.
Totally agree. Because where we've got to with questions is a nonsense, to be honest. We've got to understand that oral and written questions is the opportunity to ask cabinet members or the cabinet as a whole it's calling them to account for any decisions or likely decisions they're going to be making. So a long question, something should either go directly to the cabinet member in an email. It doesn't need to be asked as a long question in council. I mean, I just think we've taken the wrong route with those things, because the more questions we can have, the better. I mean, I totally agree with that. Otherwise, if we don't do that, what happens is the rest of us think, well, what's the point? Here's our one opportunity of engaging, and if you have long questions and long answers, fewer people can engage, and then the rest of everybody else thinks what's the point of coming to council?
Hence my reason for suggesting we stick with the way we do it today, so we get more people who have an opportunity to ask questions of the executive. If we go back to the old system, you reduce the number of people who get the opportunity, because time will be taken up by people reading questions and receiving answers.
Can I make a suggestion? In the other place where I ask questions, what is done is you say, the written questions are put in, obviously, because that's what the nature of it. I want to ask question number 2 in my name. But then you have to have a spoken answer, because otherwise the rest of us sometimes it doesn't make sense.
Well, you have the information in front of you, because the answers to certain questions are provided to all members the day in advance, and there's a follow-up question. Yeah, I want to maximise the amount of time available to members to be able to ask questions of the executive, and I believe that the current process we have is the best way of achieving that.
I was just going to say that I've always thought on this one, because I know this is basically the same discussion that was being had at the Constitution Working Group, and I don't know what we can, how we deal with it from going through what we have to recommend through. But I just think we just need to, I think full council should just decide between these two options, because ultimately we've got an overall control council. There's obviously different views. Why don't we just put it to council? These are the two options. Which option does council want to do? Because I'm not sure. The problem is whatever process you have, it all depends on how people then utilise. So you can always game and politicise any process that you put in place. So by having written questions, you could just answer yes or no, or a 2-word answer to every question if you wanted to. There's always ways that you can use the system to your advantage, whether you're the questioner or the responder. And I don't know that there's one way that is the best way. I think my understanding is when it came to the written questions, part of the reason that I think Steve suggested that last year was he thought it was a way that could be more accountable to the public in terms of having a written response, not just for questions from the members, but also from the public. I think there's an argument for that, but I think there's an argument for what Kath's saying as well. So, who knows, basically. What's the right answer?
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add to that, and I think that's right, Councillor Homewood, I think that's one of the reasons that he suggested it. He thought there was more accountability there, there's the answer there. For those that can't attend the council meeting, they can see the question asked, they can see the response. It's been almost a year in operation from after annual council. I do take Councillor Taylor's point, though. I think it has been helpful in allowing us to move through the agenda a bit more quickly, particularly in the last meetings. And we have got to motions and so on. And I think in terms of managing the time, in terms of meeting, it is helpful from that point of view. But it's a matter for this committee. I am happy to draft the wording so that at annual council we have a vote on it. If that is the will of this committee, that's absolutely fine by me.
Views from anyone else? Oh, Kath, just up.
Oh, sorry, no, go on.
Can I just applaud your additions to the respect to the chair and the mayor? Because I have to say, as a new member, I've been appalled at some of the carrying ons that's happened within the chamber. So I am quite pleased to see that respect is put back into the chamber, because I think it hasn't really honoured us as councillors and being part of the process when we've seen it happening this year. So thank you.
No, thank you. I've missed a mayor out of the general disturbance, I've noted, so I'm going to suggest I put that back in just for next year. On future years, it says chair only. Yeah.
Kath, you want to come in?
Oh, here's the first disagreement then. Because I totally agree about the respect for the mayor or the chair of a committee or whatever. And I do think we need to understand that we're not a group of people who are being controlled by somebody else. I don't know if I put that very well. So the bit that absolutely agree that, you have to respect whoever's in the chair, and equally the mayor or the chair needs to respect the individuals. That is not always apparent, actually. And if anybody is offensive or obstructs business, absolutely, we can't have that. What I don't like is this business of you've got to be absolutely quiet the whole time. Now, I'm not saying that there should be discussions all around the place, but on Wednesday, when one of my colleagues asked me a question of fact. Do you understand? Can you tell me what that is? I turned to tell them, and the mayor was not happy. Now, that is not good, is it? We're not able to just pass on. If it's a conversation, I totally agree. But if it's just sharing information, I can't. I just think this is 69 councillors in this room. We've got things we want to say and do, and that has to be understood.
So.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Councillor Pinnock, to the extent that there's got to be a balance of you being able to speak or clarify things for your group. I think it's just, but it's a very difficult position to chair the meeting. and it's just ensuring that other people can hear if there are, because if there's one conversation, that's fine, isn't there? But if there's several conversations going around the room, then that's difficult. But I take your point, it's the balance to be had.
So can I
I also wonder if it depends on where the members sat, because I suspect that sitting here as the mayor, you can hear some conversations and probably not hear other conversations. So, you know, she may be responding to some people, and yet there's other people talking in the chamber that isn't interrupting how she can hear the discussion. So I think there's possibly an element of that going on as well.
Absolutely. And
the word I didn't like was "shall be silent," because I'm not sure that's how we want you know, we're politicians. We've got things to think about and say. It's just.
Kath, I'm not sure anyone's
Just
going
not
to
be
use silence.
respectful. I mean, I can't be silent. I have to speak all the time. That's my trouble. And
just to be clear, I haven't changed that. That's the wording. That's the current wording.
Can't do with that. Can I mean, respectful. Yes. I mean, I totally accept the point about, you know, in the end, we've all got to adhere to the rules of engagement, if you like. But you can't expect 69 people to be silent for 6 hours or whatever it is, more. That's not possible.
I'm just going to bring James in.
Anyway.
Sorry, maybe I'm misreading, but that isn't what it's saying, is it? I think, isn't the procedure here saying that if the mayor speaks, that indicates to speak, then people should be quiet and the mayor should be heard. So, for example, if there's something going on, as we see sometimes, where somebody says,
I agree with that.
X person, you know, I'm making a point of order, blah blah blah. If the mayor says, "Hang on a minute, everybody, I'm speaking," it's about having someone being able to take control and have that to be able to say, "I'm going to decide. Be quiet for now. I'm going to decide." I don't think it's to say that if she hears somebody whispering that somehow there's been a breach of procedure or something.
James, absolutely right. I've read it and read it wrongly, and absolutely, if the mayor wants to speak, the rest of us need to be quiet. That's when you have 300 pages and you skim read it.
I do think as well there is some element of people learning to use a microphone, because some of the issues around not being heard is some people are just adverse to actually speaking into the microphone and actually being heard. So I don't think it's necessarily the sound. I think they just don't use the equipment that's here to actually help that. And like I am now, it's very loud because I'm using the mic properly, and I think some of our councillors, they avoid it like the plague, and you really can't hear them. So any noise in the chamber makes it impossible to hear.
I totally agree with that. The trouble with these is when you stand up, if you're tall, it's not well. But if somebody's listen, I agree with that.
You haven't got your microphone on.
I'm going to rely on one of you two to perhaps raise that at the next full council meeting to the mayor, and you know. Yeah. I think that's probably the best way to deal with that, really, isn't it? But you're absolutely right. Right, so I'm going to go through each of the appendices one by one and just see where we are with them. So the first appendix was the Licensing and Safety Committee Terms of Reference. Are we all content with that one? Interesting. The next one was the regulatory panels. We're okay with that? The next one is the licensing panels and subcommittees, terms of reference. Yeah. Okay. Corporate governance and audit, terms of reference. Now, I'm moving away from my mic now. There was a comment on this from Chris. I'll just find it. Bear with me. So, and I'll just read Chris's comment out. I think the terms of reference, sorry, speak to my microphone. I think the terms of reference should clarify the committee's role in monitoring the council's response to external audit findings and recommendations, because if you think we've talked about internal, haven't we? It might be helpful if 7.1 were clearer about the roles and responsibilities. Again, that's about risk management, which we've had an awful lot of discussion around in these meetings. He also says, I'm not sure we have approved payments referred to in 9. I don't think the committee should involve itself in authorising payments. And paragraph 12, as written, doesn't make sense.
Yep, so thank you, those are really helpful comments. So going back over the terms of reference, I was going to make a suggestion, because the section 5 of the terms of reference sets out the committee's responsibilities, and we were going to add in to assess the progress made by the council in implementing the recommendations made by the external auditor, and I think that covers that at section 5, because I think that's the bit that's probably missing. In relation to section 7, again, that sets out what the responsibilities are of this committee, and we were going to add in systems for risk management. I think it's submitted there. In relation to approving payments, yeah, we'll discuss this with Martin. There has been previous occasions where there has been a report to this committee where we've asked for a payment, where we've had particularly complex or long-standing complaints. However, principally, we do that already. So the suggestion was going to amend number 9, or to change the wording of number 9 to say, to make recommendations arising from any review of a report from the local government ombudsman, because I think that's the role of this committee, and to authorise a system of payments or any other benefits arising in the case of maladministration. What we think the committee's role is here is really about to approve the system or the principles in place, and then we will go away and ensure that any payments that we offer are in accordance with those principles.
So the wording of approve is probably the word that's a challenge, isn't it? Are we approving those payments, or are we agreeing with the recommendations that would come through from whoever brings the report to us?
I think you're either approving the principles or having oversight and monitoring.
Yeah, but it talks about approving payments. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. So rather than approving the payments, we should be agreeing with the recommendations that a payment is made. If you follow.
Yes, I'm happy to. We can look at amending it further. I think it's horses for courses. It's the same thing. I was going to scrap that wording and to make either recommendations or to. So what are you saying? So it's either the principles upon which we make those payments. So you're ensuring that the criteria we use to make those payments is correct, or you have powers to make recommendations in relation to the payments. Which are you seeking? So I think principles, but...
Yeah, I think principles, because I think the recommendation should come to us to say that as a result of this maladministration, what we recommend as you know, a way of addressing that is a payment of X, Y, Z, and this is why it's X, Y, Z, and then we're agreeing that because we're content with that response. Does that work?
You would receive that probably through Chris's report, though, so it will already have happened, but you will be approving what's in there. But it's otherwise, when he's responding through corporate complaints and looking at that payment, that would suggest that everything would need to come to corporate governance and audit in advance. You're not suggesting that, are you? Okay, no, okay, just checking. Okay. Well, okay, I'll work on that wording then, I've time to work with Councillor Taylor to draft that. In relation to point 12, we were going to remove number 12. There's a further, if you look down the list on the terms of reference at number 14, that is to remain determining nominations for charitable trustees, cases where there's been a failure to reach agreement. What we were going to add in as well is making charity and charitable trust decisions required of the council, other than where, as corporate trustee, those decisions are those of the cabinet. Yeah. I think that reflects current practice and the position.
Are members content with those proposed changes? And it's thanks to Chris really for, picking up some of those. So we're now on to, just hold on. Yeah, just hold on. We haven't got there yet. So we're now on to council procedure rules, and I think where we are is that we're content with all of the proposals other than that one item around written questions where I think James's suggestion is absolutely right, because whichever way you go, there's going to be people who are maybe not content.
Absolutely.
And then we have that debate in the chamber, and yeah. So we'll rely on you to bring forward something to full council that enables us. I'm not sure how you do that, but I'm sure you'll work it out. So I think we're happy. Well, I'm going to check with members if they're content, but we're happy with all the other proposed amendments to the Constitution and happy to recommend them to Council, subject to that one point. Are members content with that? Okay, I think we're winning. So we've just then got, actually I should check these first, but the monitoring officers protocol, were members content with that one? The standards process, and then we get to the officers' code of conduct. Officers' code of conduct is either 34 or 322, depending on which number you're looking at. Are we content with that one? No. We're as far as page 322. Have you? We'd gone through the other ones earlier. Oh yeah. Oh, you've gone beyond us. Oh, sorry, Kath. I thought you were saying we've gone beyond you. Right. Okay, just. Right, do you want to ask something on 336 then? So this is protocols for licensing and safety committee.
Sorry. On 336, on the licensing protocols, where it says, it's near two-thirds down, if a member cannot avoid expressing a clear opinion on the decision beforehand. That is really difficult for members, cannot avoid. I would rather something like has not avoided. Because cannot means they failed to keep quiet or something.
Can you just let me know which section which paragraph it is in?
Yeah, well, it's on page 336. Got it? Or page 48 of the separately numbered license, I think it's the licensing protocols, licensing and safety committee. And it's two-thirds the way down the page, just above visits to premises. Have you got it? Yeah, so it's just the word cannot. Because I just think, I mean, it's obviously been there before and I've not spotted it, but clearly, if a member has made a statement, as you do with planning, then you have to declare it and take yourself out. But cannot avoid expressing has a different connotation, I think, to has failed to avoid or has not avoided. Cannot puts a lot of pressure on the member. Somebody's asked them, and they've, instead of saying, sorry, I don't want to speak about that, they said, oh, well, you know, I agree with you, but they've failed on that as far as I can see.
Okay, so the only change really has been a grammatical one, to change it from can't to cannot. But what I can do is have a look at how we can redraft that if that's something the committee thinks is necessary. I mean, you've got to always have that balance as a member, haven't you? One not to predetermine it and one to declare any lobbying and so forth. So, and if they're there to make a decision on the facts and the information, they're here.
I'm not debating any of that. What I'm saying is there's a difference in my head between cannot avoid. Yeah, if a member cannot avoid expressing, that's different from has not avoided.
Okay.
Because cannot means somebody's asked them in the street and they've just said, oh, well, yeah, and I see your point of view. They failed in the cannot avoid, in my head. And I'm saying has not avoided. Anyway, perhaps
I think there's a little bit, because that's about favouring. If you acknowledge what somebody says and said, I'd heard you, that doesn't mean you're favouring them or agreeing with them. It's just, that's a conversation. Anyway. But
right.
Last one, was it? Yeah, so that was the last one. So we are okay with the constitution changes, all of that, bar that one item around written questions, which we'll take to full council. Thank you, Sam. I suspect are you up again on the next one?
Yes, it's me, Sam Show. So this is, the next report is the councillors and officers in Kirklees protocol. So members may remember that in May 2023 there was some members, obviously not all members were here, but for background and context, in May 2023 we got an external consultant who was she was an ex-monitoring officer, experienced, and she came in to do a piece of work with council officers and members. And that piece of work was to take the temperature check of where we were in terms of the relationship, to look at roles and responsibilities, and to advise on the protocol itself. Should we start again? Does it need significant rewording? What's the relationship like between councillors? And there was a number of workshops, 3 in particular, I think, where we brought members and councillors together to look at the protocol, to talk about roles and responsibilities, and to sort of take a temperature check of where we were in terms of relationship. The feedback from that was that actually relations between members and officers at Kirklees is very good. It was some of the best she'd seen across the country. When we looked at the protocol, the feedback was that the protocol was a little bit outdated. It probably could be a little shorter, a bit more succinct. There needed to be clear sections in there around the roles and responsibilities of members, and clear information in there regarding expectations of both officers and members, and also some clarity around consistency around if there's a complaint about each, what would you do. I think there's more information in there about what you do if you're unhappy with a member, but not so much if you're unhappy with an officer, not intentional. So I reflected on all those, and I've updated with some proposed changes, and hope I've reflected some of the feedback. The only other thing to add, I suppose, around this is there was a lot of people in the room, and officers and members were aware of the protocol. We do make councillors aware of it when they are new councillors and they join the council. We do make officers aware of it when they join and in their induction. But there was still felt there needed to be, once it had been updated, a bit of a refresh and awareness raising about the protocol. And there was a desire from both members and officers to keep that interaction. They enjoyed the sessions that we had, and they wanted that to continue. So this is just sort of the first part. The first aspect is updating the protocol. The second phase is how do we implement it? How do we raise awareness of it? And obviously we're going to have all our elections in 2026. So I do have a plan to try and do a relaunch event around the member and officer protocol. But it's here today with the suggested proposed amendments. Happy to consider any questions, members.
Thanks, Sam. Members? Yeah, Kath?
To be the one asking all the questions. I mean, this is very important about how we work together in the best interests of the people we serve. So, you know, it's all very good. So the only question I've got, I think, Sam, is this. We're on the page 346, it's the number 4 in on the actual item. Quick guide to the distinctive roles. Under the councillors heading, do not influence recommendations of reports. Because we do that all the time. In a sense, don't we? If something's coming up in my ward that I seek, that I'm really concerned about, I seek a meeting with, in one way or another, with the senior officer to try and resolve it before any decisions are made. So I'm not sure that. I mean, I know what you're trying to say, but I'm not sure that if it was people read that as the quick guide, that they would think that they can't do anything.
Happy to take that away to reflect how I word that.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is you can't change the recommendation of an officer. You can seek to, you can speak.
Right. So can you change the wording?
The wording.
Because it's only. Once the recommendation is there, that's fine.
That's the recommendation of
and
the
then
officer.
you know the argument elsewhere. But when I read it, I thought it could mean prior to written recommendations that we couldn't try and influence because of concerns raised or something. That's all.
I'm happy to consider amending the wording.
Yeah.
Is the wording, perhaps, you've got in there reports, if you replace that with officers, does that help?
Of reports?
No, do not influence recommendations of officers. Would that work for you, Kath?
Well, I'm happy to leave it with Sam. I think
yeah, it's the influence as well, isn't it? I need to think about that wording. We've time before this goes to annual council for me to relook at that and adjust it slightly, just so it's clear. I don't mind picking that up.
I don't know.
James?
Yeah, just a quick one. On page 349, where you've got the section, what councillors can expect from officers, it says, avoid close personal familiarity with councillors, and then it talks about personal relationship guidelines. Can I don't know there's the obvious, but I just want to check what's meant by that, because obviously there will be plenty of councillors who have family members or friends who work for the council. I presume it doesn't mean that if you're an officer and you're not allowed to have any sort of connection with any councillor. I'm presuming it means the way that you behave when you're at work and how you make your decisions and stuff. But just the way I read it, almost sounds like it's sort of saying you can't be friends with somebody if one of you's a councillor, one's an officer, which I'm not sure that's correct, is it? I don't know.
I'm not saying you can't be. We always say friendly, not friends, but if you are friends outside of work, obviously we can't determine that. Maybe I just look at the wording, and I also probably need to cross-reference it with your code of conduct, actually, and what it says in the members' code of conduct to make sure there's parity.
I think there's another bit. I'm worried about, I'm worried about this one. I'm worried about this one because of our deputy leader. Well, our deputy leader, your deputy leader, actually. But so Moses' partner works for the council, and if you read this as, close personal familiarity, that would suggest she couldn't. And I think that's a tad unfair. So I do think we need to look at it. It worries me.
That's what I was. There's other examples as well. I mean, I'm sure that
That's the only one
must
I
be
know of.
multiple. I mean, maybe wives obviously slightly different, but there'll be other people who have members of their family who work in some function of the council. I don't know how it works because I guess it's also going to be quite different if you're married to the chief executive. It's slightly different thing as if you're married to somebody in on one foot. So I just wonder if there may be a bit of clarity there, because the way I could have read it would be that you need to be concerned if suddenly your friend ends up being elected to the council, that somehow you're not ever supposed to talk to them again, which I don't think is what it's saying. But I think I just would a bit more clarity on what it means.
Is it about avoiding
like sexual relationships and stuff?
Well,
that's why
you can't even do that. You can't even do that, can you?
I don't know. This is what I'm saying. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'll take it away to have a look how we draft that with some clarity for members. I think it's just
it's avoiding any. It's that bit about perception.
It's perception.
Perception's a word we probably need in there, isn't it?
Yeah, and you're right. It is attributed to your behaviour as well, isn't it? Yeah, how you behave. So let me take a word and because there's several references in there to close familiar relationships and personal relationships. So that aspect I'll take away to add some clarity.
Yeah, because I picked it up in on page 352 as well. Such relations should never become so close. Well, that's going to be a bit difficult in certain circumstances, isn't it?
Just one final point on 345, both officers and councillors. Be professional, that's fine. Act as an ambassador for the council. That is stretching it sometimes, I can tell you. That's all I'm going to say.
You don't have to agree with the council.
I had one more in Appendix 2 in the Kirklees context. It feels a bit out of date. So the second paragraph talks about the members' commission, and as we move towards new council, well, I don't know what a members' commission is. And certainly new council was something we talked about years ago. It don't feel particularly new. I just don't think that's been looked at, probably. It probably just needs... I don't even know what it was. Unless it was what they called the Democracy Commission in the first place, I don't know.
I think it was probably the first iteration of the Democracy Commission, because this was maybe 2-3 heads of governance ago.
But it does need a little look at, doesn't it? Oh, sorry. Have members any more comments on this one? No. So, are we content with the suggested tweaks that Sam's undertaken to do to recommend this one to council? Yep, thank you. Is it
Me again. So this report is the procurement review, and it relates to the Gaza motion that was received at council in November. And within that motion, there was a resolution to review our practices around goods and consumables, I think it says in the motions, and where we source them from. So we've set out in the report to members how we're going to how we're going to do that and what the scope of that review is, and the things that we're going to check to give that assurance around reviewing our practices. They're set out in the report, and it was more to see if there was anything that members thought was particularly missing or any more that you thought that we might need to do. But there's a number of aspects to this in terms of looking at the legislation, looking at public procurement notices, looking at our own contract register. There's a number of aspects that we've tried to include to ensure that we give that assurance when we review our practices and our processes. So it's just what we didn't want to do is go off and review and then come back and members say, oh, what about X, Y and Z? So it's setting out the scope of what the review is and how we're addressing the motion, and all the checks and balances we're going to make. And then the suggestion is that we come back in June to Corporate and Governance and Audit. So we go away, we do the review, and we bring a report back addressing the resolution of the motion.
Thanks, Sam. I'll just open that up to questions.
So Sam, thank you for that, Sam, for the update there. So can other councillors, group leaders potentially attend that meeting in June?
This meeting's open to the public, yes, they can attend, yes, they can come along, absolutely.
Thank you.
James?
Yeah, I don't really... the only thing I wanted to comment on is, because when this motion was passed, I was a bit confused about one of the pieces of wording in it, and this is now explained, I think, here, which is when it said, the Council avoids purchases from goods from Israeli companies illegally occupying Palestinian territories. And when I listened to what people were saying, I thought they meant all Israeli companies. But what they mean is, what this is saying is we're looking at Israeli companies that are based in the actual occupied, whatever's defined as the occupied territories, i.e. Gaza or the West Bank, right? Is that what we're saying here? And I know you've said here that you look at the United Nations database. Is that seems to me quite tricky, because I'm guessing that Israeli companies will be based across Israel and potentially in occupied territories and internationally. So just wanted to clear, so you're looking specifically to identify any companies that have activities in occupied territories?
Yes, as far as we can do with what is available. And there is one of the government sites that does set out sort of which business enterprises. So that's what it specifically says in relation to occupied Palestinian territories. That is the check that we will be making. I appreciate that the world has moved on in since then. The only thing I would suggest in that is that we address that in the report that we bring back in terms of what that might mean and what that might look like, because the world will be different again possibly in June of this year when we come back.
Okay. Any more comments? On this one, are we happy to approve the scope of this review and recognise that it addresses the resolution that was passed in November? We all content? Thank you. I think that's nearly it.
Could I just ask, will this be a hot potato when it comes to council? Because, subsequent to your reply, it may not satisfy their request. So would that then be open to debate, or is it just presented as a case that we approve and that's the end of it? Because I can imagine some people being hot under the collar if it's not what they want to hear. We'll see.
Well, I wouldn't want to predict the outcome of the review, but we will bring the report with the outcome of the review here. Councillors are entitled to attend if they wish. And in terms of it going back to council, it'll just be a note in our... we normally address it. Whenever we get a resolution, we normally, when we write to government or we do a review or something like that, we normally put in, is it a note on the agenda for information that it's been addressed or that we've had the response. So that's how it will be reported back to council. The outcome of the review will come back to Corporate Governance and Audit, which really, in my view, is the most appropriate place for it.
Thank you. Just before we finish, I just want to mention something on the plan. So we've got in front of us the plan for the next meeting. On the plan, we've asked for an update on the concerns that were raised through internal audit about how tenancies were allocated. I've had an indication via Martin saying that they don't want to bring it in April. Personally, I'm going to push back and say we've asked for an update. I expect to receive an update in April. If they're not ready to bring that update, they need to come and explain why the update isn't available or it isn't ready, rather than just go, yeah, well, don't worry about it, do it some other time. So just to inform members, that's the message I'm going to go back with. Okay? Other than that, can I thank everybody for their attendance and their perseverance? Yes, absolutely. Thank you.